Good day. Hope you and yours are well. And thank you for joining in on a video training for the Elizabethtown Area School District. My name is Garrett Rain. I am the Safety and Security Coordinator for the district, and we're going to be talking about radio use and etiquette. Let's jump into the slides and keep this thing moving forward. So you can see we're going to be talking about radio use and etiquette, and in thinking about radio use and etiquette, you may just say, why in the world do I even need to watch this video? Well, maybe somebody told you you had to. That's often a really good reason to do it if we want to continue to get paid. But the other real reason is that when you think about using a radio, a two-way radio, we'll use this one as an example as we talk through this topic, is that it's actually a lot more complicated of a task than we might think. There's more factors in relation to how to do it than we may consider. We just might think, well, you just push the button and go, but there's some truth to that. But there's also some courtesy and some elements that really help us refine our radio communication so that we're going to be much more effective and maybe less annoying to those around us when we do use the radio. So let's jump in and talk through these concepts if we could, please. So the introduction is, we just looked at that. Why are we here? Radio basic use and etiquette of a two-way radio. And there's two segments that we're going to look at. We're going to have, this is the first segment where we're going to talk about just basic use and etiquette. Doesn't matter what radio you use, but we'll definitely use this one as the example, which is the SD7, which is the default radio of the school district as of 2024-25 school year. And then the second one is actually going to go into more nuances of how do you navigate and utilize this as a device. Okay, and how do you utilize what is the first network which this works on, right? There's going to be a theory, and then there'll be some sort of a little practice piece here. We're going to be, and the next one is going to be really the actual use of the device. I just said that, so sometimes I get ahead of the slides, so forgive me. Let's talk about a basic function. Put these all up here so that I just don't have to be clicking while I'm talking at the same time. So what's our goal when we're talking on the radio? Obviously, it's to communicate, right? We're trying to communicate information. It must be something of some urgency or some importance, and there's different degrees of urgency and importance that play a role in all this. But the really most important part is that goal that you'll see is on the screen right there, is compact, precise messaging. And I've used this joke before, maybe not with you folks. If I have, forgive me. It's actually an anecdote from Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, and he ended up writing a letter to a friend, and he put a tagline on the letter that says, please forgive me, I would have written you a shorter letter if I would have had more time. So being concise and to be clear and concise takes intentional, thoughtful effort. And one of the common problems that people have, and I did 27 years in state police, so I had some familiarity with radio usage, and different people had different skills, but the primary problem is that often we would just pick up the thing and start talking. And there may be times when that's ultra urgent, but most often it's not the case. You need to actually stop, pause, consider what you're going to say, and then engage the radio. That way you can have a better chance of it being compact and precise, right? Because there could be lots of people listening, right? This is not, in many ways we need to think about this as a public, think about the open phone lines, you know, when there were party lines. I don't know if anybody is old enough to remember that. There was a time when landline phone lines, yeah, I'm really dating myself. People don't even have landlines today, where many people shared the same phone. Well, in many cases, that's what this is. Everybody, you know, lots of people can hear what you're saying. So how do you do it? Well, we see that press, hold, wait, talk, release. All right, now, like we see on the screen there's that PPT button. That stands for press for talk. And if on this particular radio, let me see if I can see it. See that little red oval around the button? That's the push to talk button. And how you engage that, and I'm on a Safe Talk group, is that you push, pause, talk, test, 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 and then release. I don't know if you noticed with this radio that when I pushed the button, it took about a half second or so, and then there was a little happy beep. Probably heard that then at that time. That's an acceptance tone. That's telling you you've got the channel. And what's unique about these types of radio systems, this is a digital system, is that it enforces us being polite and that we have to take turns. Two people cannot be talking simultaneously. If somebody else were on here and had the channel and I pushed the button because I wasn't paying attention or I was impatient, whatever the answer, the reason behind it is that there would be beep, 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 an unhappy tone telling me that it's you do not have it, or maybe you're just not even on the network. You know, there's a issue that that we're not getting the cell tower, right? So it's press, hold, wait, talk, and then release. Okay, let's move on to the supplemental topic here. Let's think about the concept of how to actually speak into a radio. We want to have our mouth about 2 inches away from the radio. And there was a weird thing I used to do, one of many, okay, is that when we had our push to talk, microphones on the radios in the state police cars, is that I would put my finger on the radio, or in this case, this is the whole radio, that one was a handset, and I'd actually put it on my nose, on my face, because the goal is to be about 2 inches away from the microphone. And where is the microphone? Well, if you look on the bottom of the radio down there, let's see if I can get it there. There's a little, there it is. You can see that little tiny hole down there. That's where the sound goes in, right? So we don't want to be this far away when we're talking into it. And we don't want to be on top of it, talking into it as well. It's called eating the mic, right? There's a sweet spot, 2 to 4 inches away. And often it's better to not talk directly into the radio, but across the radio. And why is that? We breathe, and that breath can make a sound across the microphone, and it interferes with our ability to communicate clearly. Also, we use a conversational volume when we're speaking into the radio. We don't want to whisper, and we don't want to yell. We just use a conversational volume when we're talking. Let's think about our tone and our mood that's involved in this. Slow down, especially if there's something that's elevated our respiration, our blood pressure, our heartbeats, because there's some urgency going on, right? It's easy for us to come at this more aggressively than we should. And the problem is that we can then transmit our anxiety and frustration to others, and we can get an overreaction from other people on the other end because they think, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. And maybe it is, but we save that for the event when the sky is really falling. We need to speak clearly and calmly. Our anger, our fear, our frustrations, all of those things are contagious. There's a other training video that I saw, and I thought this was really good, is try smiling before you communicate. It's really hard for us to sound crabby when we're smiling at the same time. I can't even do it, right? It makes us more pleasant, and it improves the tone and mood of people around us. Because even if this is a matter of some urgency or really urgency, we don't need to be adding more chaos to chaos. The whole goal whenever there's chaos is to reach into that chaos and create calm. But that calmness has to start first with us, and we have to be very disciplined in how we project and communicate with others in those times of stress and difficulty. We also need to be thinking about, for the radio to work, it's got to be charged. It's got to be ready to go. It's got to be on our person, right? If we don't have it handy and we haven't charged it, then these charge by, there's a USB-C port on the bottom that plugs in there. Any USB-C charger will charge the radio, right? There's also bank chargers at the front desks of each one of the schools. Every one of these radios came with its own little charger and a charging cable, so those should be readily available. Good news with these is they tend to hold a charge a long time. You should be able to easily get a day and maybe even 2 days out of a charge. I wouldn't risk it. I always want to be as topped off as I can be, because if the bad thing happens, obviously like any electronic device, the more we use it, the quicker the battery is depleted. So if we start off the day with 30% and something bad happens, well, then we might not have the ability to recharge it. In the next video, we'll talk more about functions and how to take the back off, and more of the details in relation to how to utilize the radio. Let's think for a moment also of using the radio in some type of difficult to hear spaces. And I know in a school, like the cafeteria is never noisy, right? Or the gym is never noisy, or the auditorium is never noisy. In those high volume environments, that creates some challenges in being able to hear the radio. There's some tricks you can do, and my shirt doesn't really even have one of those on it, but my vest carrier does, is that if you are in one of those very loud environments, you may want to consider actually clipping the radio closer up on your shirt somewhere, and actually getting the radio closer up to your ear so that you can hear. The advantage to these radios, it's an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time, is that they have an extremely loud and powerful speaker. And you're saying, how in the world can that be bad? Well, it can be bad on a couple of fronts. One is if you're standing next to somebody else who is also holding one of these radios and they have it turned way up as well. When you transmit, your sound is going to come through their speaker, and it's going to be a few, half second delayed, and it's going to come back around, and you're going to pick up your own voice, and you're going to be creating this extremely irritating and I don't know if I have a better word, irritating echo. And we really don't want to create that echo sound, because it's interfering again with our ability to communicate clearly. So we need to tune the volume on these. The volumes are on the side. We'll talk more about function, but volume up, volume down buttons, and to the environment that we are in. So if you have it turned down for your classroom kind of setting, and now you're going to work at the cafeteria duty, you're probably going to have to turn the volume up, especially if you work at the middle school. But then remember where you're going to put it, so maybe you can hear it, right? That would be very helpful. All right, we talked about those things. Don't need to beat that horse. Let's talk about calling and receiving a call. What's the etiquette in actually making the call and acknowledging the fact that you heard the call, all right? And we'll talk through those pieces. I'm a very strong proponent of the concept of from to radio communication. From me to you. And why is this helpful and important? We're very keen on hearing our own name or our call letter, whatever it happened to be. My first name is Garrett, so if I heard Garrett on the radio, I would perk up, right? Because not too many of them, right? Good for you. And so what happens is that we'll hear the radio, and we might miss who is calling us, but we hear our name. If we say the person's name first and then our name, they will, who was that for? Was that for me? Or was that for you? Who right? We have confusion. Our goal is to avoid confusion in our communication. So by saying who you are first and then the recipient's name or title, then it's more likely that they're going to hear it, and then they might miss who was calling, and they might say, person calling, all right? Because they missed it. Right? Now, this goes to the question of, do you use names or do you use titles? It depends. What do you call the assistant principal from the high school, or do you say Mr. Byler? It all depends on who you want. You just want someone from administration, somebody from high school administration, then you would use the title, or you're going to call high school office, right? And then But it may be helpful for you if you're calling to use your name, because if you have a particular need in your classroom or space or area, then the people on the other side are going to be able to know, oh, that was Mrs. Smith who was calling. All right, let's send somebody down there, whether it's a spill or dysregulated student or whatever the problem may be. All right. Now, these radios also have radio identifier information, so if people, when you're pushing to talk, it should say what radio number, name of the radio is on there. But we'll talk more about that later. So what do you do when someone calls you? And we'll say it's Mr. Byler to Garrett. I'm fine with Garrett. All right. I hear it on the radio. I would go, Garrett here, go ahead. And then there would be Mr. Byler's turn to then communicate back with me. Now, if he gives me a chunk of information and I just need to acknowledge that I heard it, understood it, and I'm going to take action on whatever he communicated with me, it's just copy. If you watch TV, you watch the movies, you're playing the video games, a whole bunch of people in police, military world do things that are just so accurate, right, in the real world. They'll do that copy that thing. Well, that is redundant. Just copy. I think back to when my kids were younger and they used to watch, my oldest son would watch the Star Wars cartoons, and there were the droid things running around all the time, and they kept going, Roger, 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 Roger. It's so irritating. You know, one Roger is sufficient. We're not using Roger. We're using copy. That's the text. That's the appropriate response. We also don't use 10 codes. This is something that changed throughout my state police career. Generally speaking, it's best practice not to use the 10 codes. 10 codes like 10-4 or 10-20. In my world, that meant location. What location were you? From years ago. The problem is that different organizations and different places have different 10 codes, and then you're confused because somebody else's 10-20 is different than your 10-20, and now you have miscommunication, and that's flawed. Likewise, when you get to the 1074, like, man, I have no idea where that is. Where's my cheat sheet? I can't. You just use plain text. We have an incident in the hallway and in the art wing. Right? You just use plain information, plain text, no 10 codes, that kind of stuff. No, we just said that. Use plain language. What happens if you call somebody and you don't get them? So that's a challenge, isn't it? It's okay to call a second time because maybe they're busy. Now, if you've called a second time and you still don't get them, who else around them or a superior to them might you be able to call on the radio that could still satisfy your need? You could work it up the chain. There's another thing you can do too, is it said, well, picking on Mr. Byler today, is that if it's Mr. Byler that we really want in either the high school or the middle school office, and we weren't able to reach him by the radio, which would be unlikely, but pretend, Eric, don't get mad, is that you could ask, does anybody have eyes on Mr. Byler? And then if they say, yes, I see him, he's in the cafeteria lunch duty. Well, it's noisy in there and maybe he didn't hear the radio traffic. Would you please relay to him to call me on this radio or call me on my cell phone, right? So that's how we handle when we don't get a hold of somebody. Now, what happens if I'm on the cell phone because I'm dealing with something urgent and my radio keeps going off and they're saying, you know, high school office to Garrett, high school office to Garrett. I'm dealing with something. The appropriate response is for me to pick up the phone, not phone, but the radio, and transmit, this is Garrett, stand by, please. That's now communicating to those folks, I'll get back to you as soon as I can, right? And if it's ultra urgent, they would say, we have an urgent matter, right? So you can still burst in because maybe there's a more urgent thing than the other thing that we're trying to deal with on the telephone. Let's talk a little bit more about radio etiquette. Let's talk about the 8-second transmit rule. We should never transmit more information than what we can communicate in about 8 seconds. And if you took the time and just stopped for a minute and carefully watched your watch for 8 seconds, that's quite a bit of time. But then that goes to the question of, we have something that's more complicated, then what am I supposed to do in the more complex matters? Because remember, our goal is that compact, precise messaging. Once we've gone past 8 seconds, it's not compact and it's probably not precise, right? It's the long letter that we didn't edit. So what do you do with the complex communication? Because there are things that are going to take more than 8 seconds. We radio the other person we need to communicate with. It's the office, middle school office, whatever school office it may be, maybe is a good example, and ask for someone to give you a telephone call, either a call to your classroom phone or to a cell phone, right? Because phones are designed for complex, long conversations. Radios are not. Now, there's still another method that may be more complicated but still radio worthy. So how do you deal with that? It's maybe because you're not near another's phone that you can use. That would be a really good reason. Is that, let me see if I can move myself out of the way there. Oh, isn't that better? There we go. All right. Is that we can contact the other person, and I'll use Mr. Byler as an example again. I contact Mr. Byler on the radio, Garrett to Mr. Byler. Mr. Byler says, Byler here, go ahead. And I reply back, would you meet me on tack 1, please? That's me requesting that we're going to go to another channel. The primary building channels are our normal everyday business where many people need to use, right? To a more private channel where we can carry on a longer conversation, a channel where it's not going to be scanned and we're not going to irritate other people with our communication that's important to us, but not important to them. And we'll talk through what that process looks like of going to that other channel. I'll just put all of these up on the screen, and then that'll save me, again, that whole clicking thing going on here. So we decide we're going to go to the TAC channel. TAC stands for Talk Around channel. They're used for focused missions or functions, right? Where a group of people who are joined in that mission or function go there to talk about that mission or function that's important to them, that they need to get done, that may not be important to other people because they've got their own mission and functions they need to do, right? And they may be in an emergency on different TAC channels. We request the switch to the other party, but we don't start talking right away. Because if these are not scanned channels and these are for focused group of tactical communication to accomplish a task, somebody else might already be there on that channel, and they may be carrying on a conversation. And the time we turn, they're just a momentary pause between one party talking and the other party talking. And then we need to realize, oh, we need to wait 6 seconds because we don't want to jump in to interrupt and be rude. Then, if it's clear, the channel's clear. In this case, we also call them talk groups on digital radios. We can take care of our business, and then we're clear, and then we go back to our hailing channel, to our primary building channel, most likely, right? Hopefully that's clear. Let's talk about phonetics. All right, why do we use phonetics? And in a moment, I'll put some phonetics, the official phonetics, up on the screen, and you can pause and look at them, and if you want to memorize them, that would actually be useful sometimes. There's times when we are trying to communicate, and a D or a T may sound like the wrong letter, and people then get confused over what we're saying, especially for giving out serial numbers. And police world, it was registration plates and VIN numbers and those kinds of things, right? So you can see that's probably not something we're going to do a lot in the school setting, but it could be if you had a really complex name that you needed to communicate. But if we're going to be talking about students and their names, it's probably better for us to pick up a phone than to really be doing that on the radio anyway. But if they're intended to prevent confusion, and we only use them when they're needed, and we don't make them up. Z as in zebra, and P as in potato, and all of that silliness. There's an official, professional way of doing it. We should always endeavor to be professional. And here's actually the official phonetic alphabet. I think it originally came from aviation and then worked its way into the military, and this would be it. You see G as in golf, M as in Mike, V as in Victor. We have Q as Quebec, R as in Romeo. You can read the list, but that's the phonetic alphabet list that's available. Let's look at the recap. We've seen here that the use of the radio is actually more complicated than you thought, right? Like most things are if you actually start to think about them a little bit, like tying our shoes, right? Try to explain that one to somebody. So it's a learned skill, which means it's a perishable skill. So we need to think of ways maybe to practice if we're going to have to do this often. And so we need to figure out ways of incorporating it maybe even in our life if that's something that's going to be important and part of your normal daily tasks. We see that this is a training in 2 parts. The first part is radio basics, which guess what? We're almost done. And the other one would be, actually, that should say Elizabethtown Area School District radio use. So my apologies for the typo. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And I hope you have happy and precise and concise radio communication. So thank you and goodbye.